Welcome to Shades of Us. I'm your host, Darryl Brown. I'm currently standing in front of the Brooklyn Museum, whose vast collection of art underscores the differences and similarities among cultures. This month, we talk to a few people in the art world who are working in different mediums to create conversations around ancestral history, community, and culture. According to a 2019 finding by ArtNet News, at 26 prominent American museums over the past decade, 11% of all acquisitions and 14% of exhibitions were of work by female artists. We recently sat down with a CUNY curator to hear how she is helping provide artists and patrons with a physical space to heal.
I think the methods, especially in this project, the methods that artists are using kind of give us an opportunity to step back and think a little bit more about, what are we creating in our own lives? What choices are we making and producing, putting out, into the world? I'm Catherine Carl, and I am the curator here at the James Gallery, and I'm the deputy director at the Center for the Humanities here at the Graduate Center. I also teach at the Art History program. The Emmy and Tony James Gallery is much more than just a visual art gallery at a university. It really has a very particular vision, and because it's part of the Center for the Humanities here at the Graduate Center, it is incredibly interdisciplinary. We work with scholars in all disciplines. We work with scholars throughout the City University of New York system and students. The artists that I've been interested to work with are artists who are very deeply engaged with public issues, often with civic issues, political issues, but doing that in a very poetic and imaginative way. So what I decided to do is to bring together a group of students. We would work as a collaborative. That was very important, first of all, because I think that led the way to the group of artists that are now in the exhibition. We all put ideas together, and really we were looking for people's practices. This project is on nationalism. The first iteration was borders and belonging, and then as it didn't open in March 2020, we had more time to work on it, quite a lot of time to think about it and work together with the Racial Imaginary Institute. The only way to deal with nationalism, we felt at this time, is to come back to lived experience and to come back to an everyday practice, because in the end, maybe we were feeling a bit pessimistic about structures and institutions, and rather wanting, to say it's our daily decisions, that's how things can change step by step. And that's what really led to a lot of women actually being in the project, I would say, because there were a number of women like Kimberly Tate, Maria Hupfield, and also Hung An Trong. They were really reflecting on either their past generations, they were maybe reflecting on ancestors, reflecting on history, and reflecting on everyday life and the way they could build community and take care of community. For Maria Hupfield, Indigenous performance is her area. That's what she does. She makes objects, she wears them, and she performs with them and with other people. And this is an area that is quite understudied. There's a whole vast history, many histories to be written there. We wanted to have a place where activities could happen all together, and so the layout of the exhibition reflects this, that there's a large open space where Kimberly Tate's floor piece is is visible, and then that becomes a space for action, a space for gathering, and a space for questioning. There's a whole wall dedicated to questions that we generated over probably 2 years, and we weren't sure what to do with all these questions. We certainly couldn't answer them, but we wanted to put them out for people to interact with. I see in these artists' work a desire to create something and make choices, and to actually create work that is not just critical of something, critical of the past or critical of institutions, or all of those things are embedded in the work for sure, but it's in the small everyday movements that we have, power in our lives. And I think the artist bringing things close into the body, the scale is rather small in this exhibition, but the gestures are very large in the performances, and they reach out very far. I think that at this moment in nationalism that we're living through, we need to keep, kind of our loved ones close. But there's also a joy about that, to be able to spend the time and energy in that way. I think of Kimberly's work a lot in this way, Kimberly Tate's work, and also Maria Hoopfield's practices. And also Jackie Apple, who passed away, unfortunately, just before the exhibition opened, but we had a chance to interview her and work with her to make the installation here in the exhibition. And all the stories that people tell of being her student, and I think this is very important. She was a feminist, and this is a very feminist way of working, of really mentoring her students and helping them through. And I think we're, I hope, in a new moment with that as well, where women artists and teachers hopefully are seeing things a little bit differently for the next generation. And certainly the next generation of women are really wanting something different from their learning environments.
According to a 2021 CNN report by the Sentencing Project, Black Americans are incarcerated in state prisons at nearly 5 times the rate of white Americans. During World War II, after Japanese fighters attacked Pearl Harbor, many Japanese Americans were put into internment camps. It was a dark time in this country's history. My next guest's great-grandparents lived in those times and ended up incarcerated. She's using her platform to talk about her family's experience and social justice for minority communities.
People will sometimes say your work gives voice to the voiceless, but I really hate that statement. People are not voiceless, but not everybody has a platform. And I have these 2 platforms of publishing children's books and murals, so they can be really useful in a lot of different communities to communicate a message that is undertold. My name is Katie Yamasaki, and I'm a children's book author and illustrator and a muralist. I'm 4th generation Japanese American on my father's side, and on my mother's side, French, Canadian, and Irish. I don't speak Japanese. My father doesn't speak Japanese. My grandparents grew up speaking Japanese, but during the war, that kind of all changed because their families were mostly incarcerated, and so the language just kind of disappeared in our family. I grew up very aware of the mass incarceration of my family and my community. My great-grandfather was arrested the night of Pearl Harbor, December 7th, because he was part owner of a produce market and seen as a threat, and how my family had to leave college, leave their homes. They lost everything. Because of the strong anti-Japanese climate that we grew up in, I definitely felt more like I needed to get behind these stories and understand them a little bit better, and then hopefully do something with them. If I were to say when I really got started taking art seriously, it was probably in the year 1997 or so. I wasn't interested in the gallery world or the museum world because I kind of wanted to do something that had a social impact, and I didn't really see how that could happen. But when I was going into my junior year of college, a friend of my aunt's who was a children's book illustrator, he needed somebody to catalog all of his work. I saw the process kind of in how it would unfold and how so many of the drawings that he made in the beginning, as he said, were terrible drawings, but it was kind of getting the ideas out. And what I lacked in skill, I made up for in ideas. I had a lot of ideas. He immigrated from China in the 1950s, I believe. And now in his work, he was showing stories about people who looked like a lot of my family. Asians and Asian Americans and folklore. And when I looked at picture books around me, at that time, probably fewer than 5% of protagonists in children's literature were children of color. Not seeing myself and not seeing people who looked like people in my family made me think, there are these missing spots. And I ended up in graduate school for illustration here in New York at School of Visual Arts in 2001. When I finished graduate school, I had my MFA in illustration, but I still couldn't get my books published. I wanted to do books about the internment camps, and I wanted to do books that had these social justice themes. But in 2003, people were not publishing books like that quite as much as they are now. I had a friend whose mother was a librarian at a public school in New Jersey at South Orange Middle School, and she invited me to come out and paint a mural in her library. And I had never painted a mural. I had just kind of fairly recently learned how to paint, but I thought I could try this. So I did, and they generously gave me this wall. Murals kind of are their own advertisement, and that one led to another one at an African-centric school in Detroit, Marcus Garvey Academy. I've painted probably more than 90 murals at this point. I am working a lot more locally these days just because of the logistics of parenting and also coordinating with my books. My first book that I wrote is called Fish for Jimmy, and it was kind of like a retelling and a fictionalization of a family story that happened inside of one of the camps. My last book before this was called Dad Bakes, and it was about a father and a daughter kind of spending the day together. One reason I love doing children's books is because the child reader comes to you with a very open heart. And they have less baggage and less fear and less kind of conditioning around any given topic. And so when it comes to the topic of an incarcerated parent, for example, with Dad Bakes, in the author's note, where I hope the parents will read that the dad has a history of being incarcerated. And so this was them reconnecting. I think children's books can be a little bit of a Trojan horse way to bring books to readers who would not pick up a book that is explicitly about parents who are incarcerated. And I look around now, and it's not the Japanese Americans anymore who are so impacted by mass incarceration on a daily basis today. It is, Black and brown communities, and how these stories are so relevant, and how, what I hope is that other people who have experienced this, other people in the Japanese American community, or other groups who have experienced these mass displacements or things like that, where they have been punished not for what they've done, but for who they are. I hope that they can kind of get behind some of this transformative movements that are hopefully happening with the criminal justice system, and dismantling a lot of it and changing a lot of it. As I've grown older, and especially as I did this book about my grandfather, Shape, Science, and Light, My Grandfather's American Journey, which is the book that just came out, I wanted to kind of focus on getting at the essence of his work, because what he cared about were the human experiences of everyday people in the spaces that they occupied. The Twin Towers were a building that my grandfather had designed. And even though it was his biggest professional achievement, it would be for anybody, it was also kind of like a really challenging point for him professionally and personally and artistically. He never set out to do projects like the World Trade Center. He made a lot of compromises with the Twin Towers that cost him a lot personally and artistically, I think. So he became most known for a project that kind of least represented him. That was a really hard book to work on, because it, addressed a lot of family complexity and history at a time when Asian Americans in this country were once again very much under attack. And then there was a kind of surfacing of this consciousness that had been very absent for so much of, Asian American history, when there have been troubles all along. Asians were getting killed in Atlanta, and there were all these random attacks of Asian elders in the community. And, my aunt passed away while I was working on the book. So I always will go to my altar when I start. I have pictures of people who are beloved to me, who I kind of bring into the room to help me. I felt compelled to tell my grandfather's story because parts of his story were largely just completely untold. There was a lot missing from history, from the history that I learned, from the history that a lot of people learned. As far as when I think about parenting my daughter and what I hope for her, I hope that she lives in a society that's a little bit more free, where she won't feel so necessarily compelled because something is missing. But I make these stories not just for her. I've been making stories long before I had her, and I kind of always have cared about what happens for children and how they can see themselves. When it comes to having these books out on the shelves for her and for all young people, what I really hope is that they can grow with a certain amount of freedom where they can see themselves in their books. I feel that in terms of representation, being able to kind of better explain and better share the experiences, specifically the Japanese American experience from a really personal point, has been really powerful, but it's powerful because people from all walks of life are relating to it. Not everybody can relate to the idea of being separated from their family because of incarceration. Everybody can relate to the idea of missing somebody. All of these human experiences are relatable, but it's just kind of like delivering them in a way where people can hear you.
We'll be back after this break. Produced in collaboration with CUNY TV's Short Docs, let's now visit a filmmaker whose observational documentaries bring social sensitivity to people from different walks of life.
My name is Alex Lora, and I am a filmmaker. I make documentaries, I write the scripts, I produce content for TV, I edit feature films. The kind of movies I've done since I graduated, at least my personal projects, most of them are projects that have social sensitivity. It's a thing that interests me. And then for obvious reasons, I'm a person with a disability, I think that somehow think about social justice or how to make other people reflect about individuals that are not in the best position. It's something that comes naturally and kind of a goal and a mission.
म उहाँको आवाज, म उहाँको गरम गालाको छुमा सम्झिरहन्छु। उहाँ जहाँ भए पनि खुसी हुनुहुन्छ। उहाँले मलाई राम्रो ठाउँमा राखिदिनु भयो।
Paribara, it's a little short film, one of the most rewarding short films I made, and it's about an orphanage for blind children in Nepal.
मैले पढ्न जाने। मेरो कागजको स्पर्शबाट कहानी बदल्न सके। कहिलेकाहीँ म यिनीहरूको बारेमा मेरो आमालाई चिठी लेख्छु।
When we submitted to film festivals, it showed in a film festival in Nepal, and then the Department of Education gave them a grant. And that was the best award we could have got.
मैले उहाँलाई भने कि म ठिकै छु अनि उहाँले सबैले मलाई माया गर्नुहुन्छ। मैले उहाँलाई भने कि बिस्तारै बिस्तारै मैले मेरो मुस्कान पाउँदै छु।
The Fourth Kingdom is, now it's a feature documentary that we shot in a redemption center called Sure We Can, where canners, basically underdogs or immigrants without papers, go to bring cans in order to get money back, right? We found that this place kind of gave them a little bit more than the 5 cents that they receive for each can. That the place was thought in a way that it would become a community, it would become a place for them to relate with each other and kind of find a safe place. That's what we thought that Sure We Can was. Was this kind of magic kingdom, you know, or this fourth kingdom.
I spent 3-4 years at a time, or maybe longer.
3 years, you know, one after the other.
Yeah, on the street there.
Damn. I have spent time in the street, but you know, like 3-4 months, not 40 years.
Thy Father's Chair is a feature documentary that tells the story of Abraham and Shraga, who are two Orthodox Jews that have some issues. They both have OCD. They have also some problems with alcoholism, and they own this house. They are basically hoarders, and the only money they make it out of the rent that they charge to a tenant that lives upstairs. So the tenant is very upset because everything smells, and he tells that either they clean the house or he'll stop paying the rent. So they don't have any other option than bringing a cleaning team to the house and go through the last 10-15 years of their lives since their parents died.
Oh, so you're gonna leave me here? Oh, what is he? Catch them going out the window. All right, they went. What can I do?
The approach that I usually take on this kind of documentaries is observational. And that comes to the professors and the mentors I had. And also because I like narratives. So I don't make any difference between documentaries and narratives. When I deal with a documentary, I try to imagine that this is still a movie. And this ideal in which you don't intervene, you know, this is just an ideal. But what I can do is to put some rules and say like, okay, I'm just going to observe and try to be, you know, invisible there. And at some point, yes, people feel comfortable. And in that way, I do think that at some point they forget that you are there, or they even appreciate that you are there. Because there is sometimes, I don't know, sometimes we always feel a bit lonely and you like to share some things, you know. And I do feel that people, even if they say that they don't like to talk much about themselves, I do think that that's not true. That everybody wants to be heard and everybody wants to be felt, you know, in a way, or understood. And some people just don't have, you know, other people around to do that.
Alone and to take a drink. I tell you, being alone, no company, no nothing. Loneliness is the biggest disease in the whole world, too.
That's our show. If you want to know more about the guests we featured, check out our Instagram page at Shades of Us TV and online at tv.cuny.edu. I'm Darryl Brown. See you next time on Shades of Us.